First question is actually for the audience. Is everyone okay with us not using the microphone? Can you hear us all right?
Yeah.
Okay, if we wane a little bit in our volume, let us know, and we do have microphones. And also just to say, because I will forget otherwise, this is being recorded, so I hope you all have questions at the end, and if you do ask a question, just be aware that it will be recorded, and it might even be online. And I was just struck when Ken was telling the backstory that finally we all can name something good that came out of Instagram, so that's great. Something good out of social media. So maybe I can start actually where Ken left off, which is the fact that these all come from the last year of this.
Yeah.
So how much time are we actually looking at in this exhibition? We're talking about 12 months, less than that. How long does it take for you to pull this work together?
About 8 months.
About 8 months. Yeah. Okay. And the reason I start with that is because the process is such an important part of your work.
Yeah.
And in a way, the first real question I want to ask you is, do you even like to tell people how the paintings are made?
Oh, I don't mind talking about anything.
So you're quite open about that.
Sure.
So what's your attitude to, before I do ask you how the paintings are made, because I'm going to do that, what's your attitude to the role that process takes in the meaning of the works and what they do, how they perform for a viewer?
Well, I hope that, I mean, I would not characterize my work as process work, although in my maturing time, process work was very important. And so I was very aware of it and certainly influenced by it.
When you say process work, are you talking about poured canvases, or are you talking about Robert Morris?
Well, yeah, all that.
Sculpture.
Robert Morris, Richard Serra throwing the lead up against the corner of the wall.
Maybe I said.
You know, that kind of stuff. So I was influenced certainly by that, but I think process for me is, you know, I see these works in my head first. I never make drawings, but they're very incomplete. It might be a weight of a color, it might be a position of some circles, it might be just a certain kind of essence or presence. And so I begin, that gets me going, and I begin to sort of make that. And, you know, I think in that attempt to create that, you know, the painting starts to tell you what it needs. And so it's this, sometimes a struggle between you and the painting, and sometimes a smooth dialogue between you and the painting. It's not either, it's both of us together. And I say us because I think these things have an essence of their own, and they are real things, you know. So together we work it out, and I hope that we end up through that process of working it out, which is a very traditional process of, you know, like similar to painting in, taking out, you know, and I use the sander a lot to erase.
Before we get into the specifics of the process, I have a couple of other general questions.
Okay.
So I also want to establish the attitude you have to the process before we get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Sure.
So we'll understand why it matters in a way. So what you're describing is, I think, something a lot of painters can identify with.
Sure.
Maybe they start with a mental image, and then they start looking into the physical reality of that canvas, and obviously it has a life of its own, and that conversational dynamic that you described.
Yeah.
But you said something, I think, important a second ago, which is that these are real things.
Yes.
Rather than, for example, paintings of real things or representation
Absolutely.
of real things. Can you say a little bit more about what that phrase means, and in what sense are these real, in the way that, let's say, a representational painting, a still life painting, would have a different kind of reality?
Yeah, different kind of reality. Exactly. I think these have their own reality. I think when we talked briefly on the phone, I described someone in my family who were not art. My family was not clued into art at all. And but an aunt gave me an oil paint set, and I think I was around 16 or 17, and I loved my grandfather was a farmer, and I loved his boots, his work boots, and because they had so much character to them, and a lot of things. I spent a lot of time on his farm, and so a lot of things spoke to me that were objects of utility, but I sort of in my mind transport them to a different place where they were isolated. And to me, they were just beautiful objects. So anyway, I was so enamored with his boots and the character of them that I made a painting of the boots. And, for that age, I think it was a pretty good painting. I was pretty happy with it. And then, I looked at my painting and I looked at the boots and I thought, hell, I just like the boots a lot better. So I'm making my own boots in a way. And sometimes I use the analogy of, people will say, gee, I just don't get it. I just don't know enough about contemporary art. And I say, look, have you ever been on an outing of some kind and picked up a stone that just felt good to you in your hand or the look of it and kind of put it in your pocket and took it home and put it out, or a stick or anything, any object, or gone to a flea market, bought something you don't understand why the hell you bought it, and you bring it home and you want to throw it away, but somehow you line up with it spiritually or soulfully and you can't get rid of it. So, I kind of am trying to make my own rocks. In a way.
And hang them on a wall.
Huh?
And hang them on a wall.
Sure. Well, I'm a painter, and that's, but through painting, I'm trying to kind of make something that has that solidity and has that sort of essence that you're drawn to in any kind of object.
So that leads to an obvious question, which is about abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about representation. And that story you told, of course, reminds me of the Van Gogh painting of the farmers or peasants.
Yeah.
It was a famous example of how the essence of not just those objects, but the life that those objects represent, standing for, that can be captured through a representation strategy.
Sure.
And Van Gogh did it as well as anybody, of course.
Sure.
So when you shift over into abstraction, do you feel like there's a kind of like a wrestling match or a tension between the physical reality of the object and the way that it's built out from the wall, the way that you construct it in the studio, and the optical abstract image of it? Is that an operative dynamic for you? Like the way that it looks on the one hand, and the way that it is as a physical thing with weight?
Well, I care about the way that it looks, but, it's driven not by that, but by more of some kind of notion that I have in my head.
Like that starting image that you have.
Yeah. A notion, and it's basically, I trust notions, urges, passions, those kinds of things. I don't trust ideas so much.
So like the idea
obviously I have ideas, but when I taught, I used to tell students that I was against ideas because they're looking, they specifically tend to want to rely on an idea. And that's overstating it. These paintings don't come from a preconceived idea as much as they come from an inner notion. And the process, in the process of making, I hope I imbue the object or the painting with some of my own soul and spirituality. And I don't mean spirituality in a very religious way at all, but just soulful, So in a sense, it comes down to me making my own rocks, which sounds kind of dumb, but that's sort of what I'm trying to do.
Right. Well, I suppose a religious person might say only God can make a rock.
Well, yeah.
So this idea of creating an object that wasn't there before does have an implicitly spiritual and transcendent.
Yeah, and I hope that through the dialogue between myself and the making creates a sort of spiritual, soulful object.
So when you think about the viewer, let's take this painting as an example. I think it's always great to have a specific example.
Yeah.
Or the red one facing it. That dialogue, I think, is a great.
Yeah.
By the way, I think it's a great hang. The gallery did a fantastic job.
Ken did a great job of installing it.
All of us did, thank you.
But you know, the rhythm of it is quite surprising, and I think there's some really interesting conversations that happen across the gallery that don't this at first. But when you're looking at one of these paintings, you know, we might think of a spiritual, abstract painter like Rothko, for example. Somebody comes to mind for a while. Do you hope that the viewer coming to a painting like this is going to fall into a kind of silent meditative relationship to it? Is that the kind of viewing that you want?
Yeah, I hope that I mean, to me, it's meditative. I hope that translates to some people that look at it. You know, to some people it doesn't, others it does. So it's these are slow paintings. You have to look at them and you have to spend time with them. And that, politically, that's just against the grain. Because we live in a world where, you know, things were bombarded by images to the extent that images don't certainly not mean much.
That was one of the reasons why I thought it was interesting to hear that this all came about through Instagram, because that seems like a kind of contradictory situation.
It is.
But I absolutely know what you mean, and maybe this is a good moment to talk about the stratigraphy of the paintings, because for me, which I just mean the layering and the way that they seem to build up from the wall.
Right.
And then, this is actually not a good example, but quite a few of them have these glue drips.
Yeah.
That, obviously were applied at the point when the painting was in a different configuration. So there's this kind of 90-degree turn that happens. So when you have them hanging on the wall, they're sort of traveling backwards from the surface.
From the surface, yes.
So there's a whole complicated thing that goes on, at least for me, when I look at these works in person, that has to do with trying to reconstruct the step-by-step process by which they were made, which seems to be quite different from the way that Rothko works as this kind of pure visual, cloudy, you know, haze, you know, something that almost leaves.
I love Rothko. I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it's really, really different to me. So maybe here we could actually talk a little bit about how you do accomplish the paintings physically. Can you give people a little sense of that, just a taste?
Sure.
What's involved?
Sure. I have a guy, I used to do all my own work, and it just got to be, I was having lung problems, got to be a point where I just said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't want the machinery, I don't want the sawdust, I don't want all that. So I found, it took me a long time to find a carpenter who would do what I wanted him to do. Well, carpenters like things perfect.
Yeah.
And I wanted these things to be improved, very handmade. Yeah. So what I do is draw a cartoon. By cartoon, I mean on big white paper, I draw out the shape that I want.
Actual size.
Yeah, actual size. And then I give it to this guy who laminates up the wood and makes the frame and everything. And then he brings it to me. And you know, they may sit around a while, and then I'll stretch them up. And I do mount. So part of the glue comes from lamination, but most of the glue comes from mounting the canvas onto it. And I did some research about the archival quality and found that my biggest recommendation was just plain old home school.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. It's very close to PVA. It's, it's a polymer like acrylic in a way. It's chemically a little different, but most of the archivists just got down to you just use Elmer's glue.
Right.
It'll be fine.
It's somehow very satisfying to know that.
Oh, I love it because I love the color of Elmer's glue.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a primary experience.
It's an elemental kind of thing, which I hope the work is kind of comes off as elemental. So I mount the canvas with Elmer's, so it's all coated and it's laying down on sawhorses and coat it and then put the canvas on, and then I use a blade to sort of smooth it out and it pushes the glue, the excess glue, over the edge of the canvas and onto the wood. And I love that. I just love that. I don't try to make that happen. It just happens in that process.
And at what point do you go nuts with your staple gun? Because that's a big part of the...
Well, right after I glue it down, that's when I started to pull it a bit and staple.
Yeah. And is that a genuinely necessary amount of stapling that we're seeing, or is it kind of a statement that you're doing partly to emphasize?
I mean, I try not to be too subconscious about it.
Right.
But I love the process of stapling. I used to do it all by hand, and then I had bilateral lung transplant, and I was unable to do it by hand, so I bought air compressor and a pneumatic stapler, which made things much easier. I just like staples, and I like showing how it's put on.
Yeah. It gives the painting a real tenacity.
Yeah.
In my view, it's like it's holding on to itself.
Right. Well, you feel that kind of stretch and attachment.
Well, so if we look at a painting like this, then, as I said, that's not a great example in terms of the stapling, but if we think of the painting as being held constantly under tension, or as having this kind of grip on itself, then there's also something for me that happens with the surface where even the forms, by which I mean those two verticals in this case, or the dots in other cases, it seems like they're almost being held in a kind of force field, or a tractor-beam relationship to each other because of that physical pulling. So that's just an observation. But can I ask you, first of all, how you actually then go ahead and add color pigment to the surface and treat that? Because you talked about the sand earlier. That seems like an important
on this painting, I just mixed up. I wanted a soft yellow, and I mixed that up and put it on there. And
with a brush.
Partly with a brush, partly with like a putty knife kind of thing, blade. And then I sanded it, and it was just too perfect, too yellow. So I started washing over it with my hand and a rag, washing over it. And this painting didn't get finished. It started and it didn't get finished for almost 2 years. That's really unusual for me. It just got to a point where I did not know what to do with it. And those relief marks started as like the green painting where the lines are removed. This painting started with lines removed. And it just wasn't right. I just couldn't get it to a place where I felt good about it. And so it sat for a long time. I mean, I started building up over that, filling that in and building up and sanding it. And finally, I just thought, I don't know what to do with this painting. It's not coming together. I'm going to sand those two things standing out. I'm going to sand those down flat and start again. Well, I hit it with the sander, and I realized that after being roughed up, those lines seemed to feel right there, And so I stopped, and it was finished.
There it is.
And there it is.
It's a great story because I sort of intuit that we could hear a similar story, maybe not a protracted one,
Right.
but a similar story about decision making within each of the paintings.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a great way to pin down what you're doing and how it's different from other artists who might superficially seem quite similar. Like I'm sure everybody has their own associations because it's a very wicked crowd, I sense. But I was thinking about Ken Nolan, for example, who does have an interest in these very close color values. He's got a very strong interest in floating forms. But there's something that's almost antithetical between your work and his, and that story really nails it.
I love Ken Nolan, but I don't think about it much.
Right, because what you're doing is so palpable and assertive in terms of its physical.
Yeah.
And he's almost trying to do exactly the opposite.
Exactly.
So when you come over to a painting like this thing, again, I'm probably just wanting to get some examples.
Yeah,
of
sure.
the process. But in this case, you have this very strong red in the center, and white dots next to it. So it's doing something quite different from this painting, which is very close in value, and has that kind of uniformity of tension. And this one has this classic kind of Hans Hofmann in-out thing that happens, almost like a traffic light, even you could say.
Yeah.
And it really beams out at you in contrast. So how do you get to a level of comfort with that kind of motif that's so symbolic or iconic, as opposed to something that's much more kind of textural and subtle? How did you get to that particular realized?
See, I think in my head, in my mind, there's not a huge difference between that painting and that painting. I mean, they are different, but to me, in the making, and in the process that happens, although that painting didn't take 2 years, they're the same.
In the sense that they're both conversational and dynamic as you're making small scale choices.
Exactly.
Accumulating into an image.
And in the, that's a stack of circles. It's totemic. There's always kind of a relationship between elements. And I think I want to go about that in the most dumb way. And I say dumb, not really inferring that kind of an anti-aesthetic way. It's like, where am I going to put this circle? Well, hell, I'll just put it in the middle. Well, that's dumb. I mean, that's not very design conscious.
Right.
But
the difference between dumb and inevitable is probably quite close, right?
Yeah.
So that's
dumb doesn't mean not knowing to me, as I use the word.
Right.
But it means a more direct and honest placement rather than a real thought out kind of placement.
It's an interesting word, dumb, because it also can mean mute, not speaking. These are quite quiet, first of all. But it also makes me think about something else that was playing in my mind when I saw the work, which is about language. Because one way of reading these would be as a symbolic code that's almost in the process of formation. Like you talked about the totemic quality of these three stacked circles, where I love what you did with your fingers there.
Yeah.
That, 2 marks.
Yeah.
And it feels a little bit like a kind of semaphore or a signaling situation, but not obviously at the level of being legible in any sense.
Right.
But like a kind of, like a semiotic baseline that maybe something could rise out of. And I feel like when you say dumb, it also makes me think about the idea that meaning is being kind of captured in its moment of formation in a very primary level.
Right. Well, I think, I'm trying to make something that's very elemental and a bit ineffable. So that there's some mystery and ambiguity. And I want to make something that is not easy to talk about.
Right. We're trying.
We talk around it.
So exactly. So one other motif I did want to ask you about, which is the way that you're anchoring the circles and the perimeters of several circular paintings.
Yeah.
And that if there's one motif in the show that seems like a kind of iterative,
Yeah.
quite distinctive thing. That's the one for me, at least, that jumps out. Can you say a little bit about the compositional choices that led to that particular set of decisions, this idea of the circle fleeing to the rim that articulates the image?
Well, you know, the way that the process goes, a lot of times, I have a lot of circles cut, and I pin them.
Oh.
So,
And move them around to see how it
I move them around, and that just sort of happened by moving these things around and not knowing where to put them.
Right.
And they just seem to want to hug that edge. And up the placement up and down where they occur just seemed very natural. I mean, to me, it sort of anchored the thing. There's a back and forth interaction between those two circles.
Yeah.
And it just made me happy.
You know what it makes me think about, and this is, I'm sure, just a personal reference, but it made me think about it as the opposite of Mondrian, because you know what Mondrian does is to imply that one of his rectangle or square, or I think especially the diamond configured abstractions, that they could expand infinitely.
Sure.
There's this idea of a kind of utopian style total language that just goes and goes and goes.
Right.
And it could be your house, it could be your city, it could be your clothing, etc. And that to me is so much about finding the boundary and marking it, like planting a flag at the edge of your
kindness, yeah,
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like a painting. We were talking earlier about your paintings kind of having a grip on themselves, and this one feels like a hug. Like it really wants to sort of, it knows where it is and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Very solid, to use that word.
Yeah. I think that's why it made me happy.
Yeah. Are there any paintings in the show that are not in the room that you would want to direct people's attention to, and any surprising anecdotes or any paintings that you feel like are traveling in a new direction for you that you're particularly excited about? Like, is there a painting in the show that makes you think, you know, I need to do another painting that responds to that one?
They all do that.
So it's ongoing set of thinking. Okay.
Yeah. And I think my basic process will be constant, but the work may, the look of the work may change. And that's been true throughout my career. I think I've always been making work that is about the same issues that we have here. But, you know, through different periods of a decade or more, the work may look or appear different. But it essentially is still about the important things to me, which we've touched on.
Yeah. You know, that's what you're describing, the kind of process of relay process by which things that are maybe quite deeply buried in one painting might emerge in a more strongly stated way later on. It's also a great way to see the show. So, for example, this painting that we talked a lot about at the beginning, and the one all the way down the end with the long.
Oh, the long one, yeah. I love that painting.
I love it too, and it's a very unusual format for you. And you know, those two paintings obviously aren't even in the same space, so you can't see them at the same time.
Right.
But you hold them in your mind together, and they do a lot for one another.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
I do have a couple of other questions after we move on from the specific works, but I do want to talk about the black one that's behind us, probably because everyone's looking at it, but also because it has a really, again, unusual, almost cosmic sort of spatiality to it. It's very, very deep. I think it's probably just the spaciness of it, but it makes me think about Reinhardt too, the kind of closeness of the two blacks, and the way that he achieved this kind of depthless quality to it. But then, what I think is really unusual about it is it has these kind of almost scarring incidents. And going back to that long one, there's a lot of smudging on it. It almost made me think of like your fingerprints.
It is.
So, what is your attitude to these incidental, sort of miscellaneous happenstance marks that happen on the surface? Like, why is it important for you to preserve them? And do you cultivate them? What's your relationship?
They usually happen sort of accidentally in the process. you know, it's like the happy accident. I mean, you know, you sort of either you obliterate them or accept them.
So you do keep some, not others.
I do. On this painting I did. I painted out some. There were too many. So I painted out some and let the other ones stay. And this painting originally, what I wanted was a black painting with a great surface and then just this intense blue circle in the middle. And so I did that. And you can see that blue peeking out.
Yeah, just at the edge, yeah.
I liked it. It was great. But I just, after living with it for a while, I thought, you know, that's going to be another painting, blue thing. But it's not this painting. This painting needs to be black.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of why you kind of, I felt your brow fart, I want to call it cosmic. But I think part of the reason I feel that way is because of the aura around the black.
Yeah.
It had this mandala.
No, I can see that. I didn't intend that. I don't think about it. Really, when I'm making these paintings, I'm not really thinking about spatial things. You know, you were talking about back and forth. That occurs, but it's not a concern that I really think about.
Because you're so interested in this object.
I'm really concerned with it as a real thing, not as a representation of space.
Right.
That occurs, obviously, in almost anything. If you put a line on a piece of paper, you get a relationship with space.
Yeah, sure. It comes for free anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
So this leads us back in a way full circle into one last sort of line of questioning I did want to ask you about. And I feel a little funny asking this almost as if I'm contractually obligated as a New York art critic and as a Texas-based artist. But it's partly prompted by the Boots story and the fact that you do come from, at least some of your family was farmers.
Yeah.
And you're there in Dallas and you're working in Texas context. And I was really struck by your reference earlier to people who don't necessarily know anything about contemporary art and say, I don't know how to look at this.
Right.
So I wanted to just ask you to say a little bit more about what it means to be a Texas artist, what you conceive your audience to be, and how you understand your work evolving from that place, if at all. Like, is this Texas art in some sense?
I just ended up in Texas.
But you were born in Galveston.
Yeah, but I never spent any time in Texas until I got out of graduate school. My first teaching job was at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. And then I went to the University of Texas and taught for a while. And my last teaching gig was head of painting at the University of Texas at Arlington. And then about 20 years ago, I just decided to leave teaching. Not because I didn't like it. I liked the students and I liked the process of teaching. But education has changed so much that I became pretty pissed at the whole process.
Yeah.
It's less about students, less about the real thing, and more about something else.
Yeah.
What I don't know.
Crawl to the top of
Meetings.
the stack.
It's about meetings.
Yeah.
Let's have a meeting for 2 hours, interrupt your class, and not get anything accomplished.
Instead of meeting at the end.
Yeah. Instead of another meeting, absolutely. So I quit teaching. I have never thought of myself. I mean, there are Texas artists, and the sort of history of that and the prominence of that has been work that is narrative. And I think a lot of Southern work tends to be narrative, image-oriented narratives. And I don't have a problem with that. I've just never identified with it very much. So I've never thought of myself as a Texas artist. And I think that's been a little bit of a difficulty living in Texas, although I do have an audience there. But I just always felt like the work was not about where I lived. It was more related to the larger context context of the work.
Sure. However, there is something about accessibility that is implied by the work, like the sense of it being like a rock that you can pick up from the beach.
Sure.
So this, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth now, but what I take from that analogy is that you don't necessarily need to know a lot about the history of painting or the history of abstraction to enjoy these paintings.
No.
You just need to come to them.
You don't need to be intimidated by them,
Yeah.
by the lack of knowledge. I mean, it's funny, people are intimidated by walking in galleries, you know? And then they're intimidated a little bit because they think they don't know enough to understand the painting. I mean, the paintings can be talked about on many levels. You can get esoteric about it. You can get, it's like a movie or a book. You can analyze it, look at it upside down, sideways. But the essence of the painting, I think, should be accessible to almost anyone that's had that experience with a rock or a stick or whatever. So people are equipped to understand it on a very basic level. And I want people to chill out a bit and not worry so much about what they know and what they don't. It's more about spending time and relating, in a very haptic, physical way to the work.
So, and this will be my last question before I open it up to the audience, because I want to make sure
Yeah, sure.
have a chance to pose questions to you.
These are very uncomfortable chairs, by the way.
So my question was, I'm going to skip over the design history opportunity there and cut to the question. So it just, not to belabor the Texas versus New York thing too much, but the whole idea that a painting could have that kind of accessible, unintimidating character, in some way to me suggests that in miniature or a kind of compressed way, there's a kind of tacit argument about what art should or at least could do culturally, so that it shouldn't retreat into its esoteric ivory tower conversation itself.
Right.
It should go forth and give pleasure and give satisfaction, curiosity, and so on. And I think that's a kind of easy position to agree to in some ways, especially these days. But it's kind of these days that I want to ask you about, because here we are in 2018, we're in this kind of rock and sock and political scenario.
Right.
You're in Texas, which obviously has become, not uniformly, but on balance has become a kind of anchor of the conservative political movement in the country.
It's changing, but yes, you're right.
Yes, and it has changed a couple of times already.
Yeah.
It's a complicated scenario in its own way. But do you feel like there's anything about this work that you would at least like to see perform above and beyond the domain of art that sort of makes an argument about what art could do culturally for people that may or may not be involved with the art world already? Like, is there a kind of ideological or philosophical program that the paintings exemplify that are making it beyond the paintings?
Well, I think I've already talked about my philosophical views, and they're pretty democratic. And I want people to, the informed and not informed, to be able to enjoy them. I can't control that, really. I just make the paintings as I see them. I've never, and I think this is important, I've never thought of myself, I am located in Texas, but I've never thought about myself. I spent a lot of time in New York in the 80s and thought about moving here. We used to take sublets, my ex-wife and I, for 2-3 months at a time, and then be gone for a couple of months and take it, find another sublet, come up and stay. And I just really, came really close to buying a loft. Back in those days, you could afford one in Tribeca. And so, I had a lot of friends here, but it seemed to me that everyone was so self-conscious about any move that they might make in their work and what the implications of that would be. And they were so self-absorbed. They were great people, but I got a little worn out with the self-absorption. And, what I thought was isolation in Texas started to become a certain kind of freedom.
Right.
It's like nobody's looking. Nobody really gives a crap what I'm doing. So I can do anything. And, I have a lot of freedom that other people don't seem to have. And so, there's pluses and minuses to living in Dallas. But I found that great when I turned that around from isolation to opportunity and freedom. Then it became a very comfortable place to live and work.
That's a great story to hear.
And I can still come to New York when I want to.
Yeah, I suppose you could try to flip that insulation thing, even if you did live in New York, just close your door. Right?
It's harder, I think. It's a much more pressurized environment. And you can, but it is harder.
Okay.
You need to have a country house.
Yeah, exactly. That's the spirit. Right. So there are artists in the audience, I know there are a couple. There's at least one perspective on how you might conduct your business. Are there questions for Otis before we conclude? Yeah.
I really liked your, when you talk about painting as a notion and how they start out as a notion. But they also seem to have like a really strong sculptural idea to them. And I was wondering if you think about them as sculptural objects at all.
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I'm not making sculpture. I think the heavy relief and sometimes the surface can be somewhat sculptural. I want a presence. But I don't think about sculpture much. And these are not, I like sculpture a lot, but I don't think these are sculpture. They're frontal for the most part, although, the way that I make the panels and, the edges are important. So it's there, but it's not a great concern. I want it to be there, but I don't think about sculpture when I'm making these.
Of course, they also, this may be an obvious thing to say, but they are shaped canvases, which is its own genre.
Yeah.
So the idea that they have to choose between painting and sculpture and the way that's been dealt with by these medium categories.
All paintings are shaped.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, why do we say the round ones are shaped and the square ones are?
Yeah.
Exactly. We have another question here.
As a fellow artist, I'm really curious about how do you work on one at a time?
I usually work on two at a time. That's about my limit. And my wall can take two, and my mind can take two.
You're saying you work in small space.
Well, yeah, it's not tiny, but it's not, I don't have some huge loft.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a loft, but part of it is living, part of it is studio. And I like it that way. And sometimes if I'm working on a big piece or I need to stretch a piece, I'll move my furniture and extend the studio out, which I can do. But I try to confine it to a certain area that I have.
Is there a reason you work on two paintings and not just one?
It's maybe related to the fact that I do two things here, and two things there. I don't know.
Relationship.
I mean, so, when you're working on two, one will get more attention than the other, and one might inform the other. So, when you're stuck on one, you might really focus on the other one. And they kind of have a dialogue going on.
So in your mind, do they stay related, like siblings? They kind of float free to one another once that's done? Okay.
Yeah. No, when they're finished, they're separate
Right.
items. But in that process of making, I think it's, there is a dialogue going on, and sometimes a mistake you make over here or something you do over here might inform your decisions about the other people.
Like, I don't like it here, but I like it there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Or, oh, I know what I want to do over here.
Yeah.
You know, the light bulb goes
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. It's kind of like you have a lot of ideas when you talk to somebody. Right?
Yeah.
Conversation.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Do you have any special relationship with lines and circle separately? Have you mixed lines and circle in the same painting?
No, I treat them all equal.
But in terms of the shape of the painting itself, you see that the circle ones is not a perfect circle, while the square and rectangle frames or paintings are more symmetrical and you can visualize more as lines. I'm just asking if you personally have any kind of way to see lines and circles separately.
No, to me, it's all kind of the same.
The democratic thing.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that they do have their own worlds,
Yeah.
right? Like they create a kind of microcosm of what is
Sure.
appropriate.
Sure, I agree with that. Yeah.
Which I appreciate the thrust of the question.
Yeah, I do
Because
too.
to me, the line ones and the circle ones are super different, usually, right?
They're super different but the same.
But also the same. Mark, one second.
Listening to your answers and statements, do you inherently reject categorization?
Well, I'm not big on it.
Do you think that sort of informs the way you approach making these objects?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody is no one that I know that's an artist is really too interested in categorization.
A lot of artists fall clearly into certain categories.
Sure,
and I don't
but
think
we
you're
may
one
not
of
like it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, people tell me all the time I'm a minimalist. I never see myself as that. I think it is about, I think I am a reductivist. I want what's essential and elemental. Something that, to me, strikes a sort of universal core that all of us have. That interests me to some degree. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but I think that's something I want in the work. Sometimes it happens and it's successful, and sometimes, it misses. But I think when I'm at my best, the work becomes a little bit ineffable, hard to categorize, hard to pin down, it has an ambiguity and a mystery, and that's what makes it interesting to me. And it may mean something to you, it may not. And you may have a different feeling about it than me, and all that's fine with me.
I wonder if that's why artists don't like categories, because all of the best art is by definition sui generis. It sort of makes its own space and its own category, you can say. So when you categorize it, it inevitably sort of makes it an example of something rather than just what it is.
So you also sort of rejected being a Texan. You also sort of rejected being a Texan.
Well, no, I'm fine being a Texan. I'm just saying that the kind of work that I make, I've never thought about as Texas work.
Yeah.
I've always thought about it as a more universal kind of work and addressing issues about painting that are not limited to state boundaries.
So it's almost for us. I'm going to just take one last question from our host, MARC STRAUS.
Wow, okay. I think the discussion about making abstract paintings that come from ideas versus some intuitive, visceral place is really critical.
Yeah.
And for those of us who have collected art for a long time and lived with abstract paintings, the first painting I bought was a Kenneth Nolan Shepherd.
Right.
And I've lived for a long time with Rothko, Ellsworth Kelly. Now for only a couple of days was one of your paintings. But, you know, I have some biases, and some of the biases are that the people who paint abstraction from ideas often, unfortunately, have a limited shelf life because the ideas may not be there after a while.
Yeah.
I actually see Kelly, ironically, as somebody who painted from some visceral, emotional place, not from so much ideas, which is maybe why he only averaged 8 or 10 paintings a year. And I certainly see that with Rothko. And I think for you, Rothko made these great paintings till the 70s. For you to make these paintings at age 71, I also think, and this is the receptor side of an artist's work, I think your work is better than last year when I saw it, and 2 years ago. I don't know why, but somehow there's this thing that happens where you push this visceral sense of what you have to do.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that is just age.
So am I going to be a better collector?
Some people are better. Some people are better when they're younger, and some people maybe get better as they age. So I think to me, aging and having come close to death a few times loosens me up a bit and gives me freedom to access freely without subconsciousness a part of me that is visceral. And I'm not afraid to express that, So I think that may be what you see. I don't know. I'm not the best judge.
Maybe you're just getting started.
I'm just getting started.
Okay, so on that profound note, and I think these are profound works, so it's been a real pleasure to
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And also thanks to our hosts for having us here. I'd just like to ask you to join me in thanking Otis Jones.
Thank you, sir.
I want to thank Glenn. It's been so great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Glenn.